Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Dr. Mohsin and our lecture today will be on the gross anatomy of spleen as well as the portal vein. First of all, the spleen is a soft, vascular and reddish or darkish purplish color structure which is present inside the abdominal cavity in the left hypochondrium. It is the largest single mass of lymphoid tissue in the body and it acts as a filter for blood and also plays an important role in immune responses in the body. The major functions of the spleen include phagocytosis. They also include hemopoiesis, which is the formation of new red blood cells or new blood cells. So the location of the spleen is basically oval or wedge-like in shape and it lies majorly in the left hypochondrium and part of it also lies in the epigastrium. So this wedge-shaped organ is basically wedged between the fundus of the stomach and the diaphragm, and it lies just beneath the left half of the diaphragm, close to the 9th, 10th and the 11th ribs. So over here we can see that these are the 9th, 10th and the 11th ribs which are overlying the spleen, and between these ribs and the spleen is the diaphragm, which is separating it from them, and these ribs are also leaving certain markings or impressions on the diaphragmatic surface of the spleen. We can also see several external features of the spleen in this diagram. We can see that we have a superior border of the spleen, we can see we have an inferior border of the spleen, and we can see that we have an anterior end and a posterior end of the spleen. So the size and dimensions of the spleen, they are basically relatively variable and they differ from person to person. The spleen is approximately 3 to 4 centimeters or around 1 to 2 inches thick. It is 3 inches or around 7.5 centimeters broad, and it is around 5 inches or 12 to 13 centimeters long. These are the dimensions of the spleen, and the weight of the spleen, this varies from 80 to 300 gram in different individuals. And as we already know that the spleen is related to the costal surface of the 9th, 10th and the 11th ribs on the left side. The axis of the spleen. Now the spleen is a wedge-shaped organ which is not lying in a straight manner inside the abdominal cavity. Rather, the spleen is lying in an oblique manner, and the long axis of this obliquely lying spleen is along the shaft of the 10th rib on the left side. So over here we can see that this is the long axis of the 10th rib on the right side, and this is the long axis of the 10th rib on the left side, and along this long axis the spleen is lying in an oblique manner, and the direction of the spleen, therefore, as we can see, it is downwards, it is also forwards and laterally, and as it descends, as it follows its course downwards, forwards and laterally, it makes an angle of 45 degrees with the horizontal plane. The lower pole of the spleen, this extends forwards only as far as the mid-axillary line, and normally this lower pole cannot be palpated when we are doing a clinical examination on the patient. So the external features of the spleen, we have seen some of these external features in a previous picture, that we have two ends of the spleen. We have an anterior end of the spleen and we have a posterior end of the spleen. So since the spleen is directed downwards, forwards and laterally, let me just get my pen. The spleen is directed downwards, forwards and laterally. So the posterior end, this posterior end is also the medial end. This is the posterior or the medial end, which is, as you can see, directed upwards and backwards as well as medially. And the lateral end is also known as the anterior end. So this is the anterior or the lateral end following the direction of the spleen. This is directed downwards and forwards, and as we have said above, it reaches the mid-axillary line. We also have two borders of the spleen. So we have one border of the spleen which is the superior border, and we have an inferior border of the spleen as well. The superior border near the anterior end, it has a characteristic notching present in it. It has a characteristic notching present in this, whereas the inferior border is relatively rounded. We also have another border which is present on the visceral surface, and this is an intermediate border of the spleen. We will look at this in just a couple of minutes. Then we have two surfaces of the spleen. So there is one surface of the spleen which is in relation to the diaphragm, and this surface is known as the diaphragmatic surface. This surface is convex and smooth, this because it is covered with the diaphragm. And then there is another surface known as the visceral surface, and this visceral surface is concave and irregular. Why it is irregular? Because it is related to the various viscera which are present inside the abdominal cavity, as we will see in just a minute. We also have two angles of the spleen. We are going to see these angles in the next couple of slides. We have an anterior basal angle. So this anterior basal angle is present over here at the junction of the superior border with the anterior or the lateral end, and this is also known as the clinical angle of the spleen. Why is it known as the clinical angle of the spleen? Because this is the end of the spleen which will enlarge beyond the mid-axillary line when the spleen is larger in size due to any pathology. So this is the angle which we can palpate when the spleen is enlarged. So this is why it is also known as the clinical angle of the spleen. And we have a posterior basal angle which is present at the junction of the inferior border with the anterior or lateral end. So over here we will have the posterior basal angle, which is also known as the anterior basal angle. We will see this in just a minute. And finally, on the visceral surface between the superior and intermediate borders, we will have the hilum of. So in this diagram you can see that we have the medial end, which is also the the medial end and the lateral end. The medial end, as we have said, is also the posterior end, and the lateral end is also the anterior end. We have the upper or the superior border and the lower border over here. The upper border, near the place where it meets the anterior end, it presents with characteristic notching. So over here we have this angle, which is the anterior basal angle, and we have this angle, which is the anterior basal angle or the posterior basal angle. And over here you can see that we have the intermediate border, and between this intermediate border and the upper border we have the hilum of the spleen, and this hilum of the spleen is going to transmit the splenic vessels. Again, in this diagram you can see the structure of the spleen in relation to the structures. So you can see that the spleen, this is how the spleen is present inside the abdominal cavity. These are your 9th, 10th and 11th ribs over here, and on their inner surface they are lined with the diaphragm, and beyond this diaphragm lies the spleen. So the spleen is related to the diaphragm. It has a surface which is covered with the diaphragm, which is the diaphragmatic surface, and we have an internal or visceral surface which is then related to the various viscera present inside the abdominal cavity. Over here you can see that this is the visceral surface which has impressions for the different structures. This is this part where you can see the anterior basal angle or the anterior basal angle, and this is the part where you can see the internal basal angle, where the anterior or lateral end meets with the inferior border of the spleen. Over here you can again see the superior border, the inferior border, and the various surfaces of the spleen. You can see that we have an upper border which is notched at near the anterior or lateral end. We have a posterior or medial end, and we have a lower border of the spleen. And this impression, this view that we are seeing of the spleen, this is of the visceral surface of the spleen, and this border over here which I am highlighting right now, this is the intermediate border. Between this intermediate border and the upper border we have the hilum of the spleen over here. So the spleen is an intraperitoneal structure. It is surrounded by peritoneum, and it is also suspended from it by the lienorenal and the gastrosplenic ligaments. These are two peritoneal reflections or peritoneal ligaments which are basically suspending the spleen inside the peritoneal cavity. The gastrosplenic ligament is the ligament which extends from the hilum of the spleen to the greater curvature of the stomach. We will see this ligament in just a minute. And this ligament, it actually transmits certain vessels such as the short gastric vessels and also lymphatics and sympathetic nerves. Why it transmits short gastric vessels? When we come to the arterial supply of the spleen, we will see that the spleen is supplied by the splenic artery, and this splenic artery gives off certain short gastric vessels which communicate and supply the greater curvature of the stomach through this gastrosplenic ligament. We also have a lienorenal ligament which is extending from the hilum of the spleen to the anterior surface of the left kidney. So it is also known as the splenorenal or the lienorenal ligament. This ligament is going to contain the tail of the pancreas, the splenic vessels, the pancreatic or splenic lymph nodes, and other lymphatics and sympathetic nerves as well. And finally, we have the phrenicocholic ligament. So this phrenicocholic ligament is not exactly a ligament which is suspending the spleen. It is more of a structure which is extending from the colon, the splenic flexure of the colon which we have studied previously, to the diaphragm opposite the 11th rib. And this phrenicocholic ligament is just providing some sort of structural support to the anterior end of the spleen. It is also limiting the left paracolic gutter, but this phrenicocholic ligament is not directly attached to the spleen itself. So over here we can see this is the spleen over here. We have two ligaments that we can see over here. So we have this kidney over here a little bit on the back. This is the posterior portion and this is the anterior area. So on the back we have the kidney, and the anterior surface of the kidney, of the left kidney, this is related to the spleen through this ligament which is the linorenal ligament. And as you can see, this linorenal ligament is transmitting the tail of the pancreas, it is transmitting the splenic artery as well as certain lymphatics and pancreatic or splenic lymph nodes. And then over here we have the stomach. We have the greater curvature of the stomach over here, and between the greater curvature of the stomach and the spleen we have the gastrosplenic ligament which is transmitting the short gastric artery and lymphatics. We have the similar depiction over here. We have the linorenal ligament containing the tail of the pancreas and the splenic artery, and we have the gastrosplenic ligament containing the short gastric vessels over here. This is again a similar representation but in a transverse section. So you can see that the stomach is present over here. Now we have this is the anterior part and we have this is the posterior part over here. And now you can see that the spleen is communicating with the anterior surface of the left kidney through the linorenal ligament, and it is communicating with the stomach through the gastrosplenic ligament, and these ligaments are transmitting certain structures from the spleen, between the spleen and these other structures, other organs. So these were the peritoneal relations of the spleen. Now we are going to come to the visceral and the diaphragmatic surfaces of the spleen. The diaphragmatic surface of the spleen we will cover in the next slide. The visceral surface. Now the visceral surface, as we have said, this is representing the anterior relations of the spleen. And this visceral surface has different impressions for the structures which are surrounding the spleen. So these major structures include the fundus of the stomach, the anterior surface of the left kidney, the splenic flexure of the colon, and the tail of the pancreas. So we are going to have 4 impressions for these different structures. We are going to have a gastric impression, which is the largest impression present between the superior and the intermediate borders. It is the largest and the most concave impression. Then between the inferior and the intermediate borders, we will have the renal impression. We will also have a colic impression, and this colic impression will be at the anterior end of the spleen, and the lower part of this colic impression will be related to the phrenicocholic ligament. And between this colic impression and the hilum of the spleen, we will have the pancreatic impression. Let's see these impressions in just a minute. So now we have the visceral surface of the spleen over here. You can see that this is the intermediate border, this is the superior border. Between these two borders, we have this very huge impression known as the gastric impression. Then between the inferior border, this is the inferior border over here, and the intermediate border, we have this impression for the kidney, for the anterior surface of the left kidney, which is the renal impression. Thirdly, we have this colic impression which is present near the anterior or the lateral end, and between this is the hilum of the spleen, and between the hilum and the colic impression we are going to have the pancreatic impression for the tail of the pancreas. So this is going to be the short pancreatic impression. Again, this is just another diagram which is depicting these major impressions. We have the gastric impression over here, this huge gastric impression. Then we will have the renal impression over here, and this will be the colic impression. And over here we will have a short impression between the colic impression and the hilum for the pancreas, for the tail of the pancreas basically. So the hilum is basically present, as we have said, between the intermediate and the superior borders, and this hilum is transmitting the splenic vessels and nerves, and it also provides attachment to the gastrosplenic and the linorenal ligaments. So over here we can see that this portion of the spleen, this is the hilum, It is providing attachment to this gastrosplenic ligament, which is going up to the greater curvature of the stomach. It is also providing attachment to this splenoligneal ligament, which is transmitting the body and tail of the pancreas. In this diagram, we can see the hilum a little bit better. We can see that the hilum is not only providing attachment to these ligaments, it is also providing attachments. It is also providing a passageway for the short gastric vessels through the gastrosplenic ligament, and it is also providing the site for the entry of the splenic artery and the site for leaving of the splenic vein to and from the spleen respectively. The diaphragmatic surface, as we have said, it represents the posterior relations of the spleen, and this is related to the diaphragm separating the spleen from the costodiaphragmatic recess of the pleura, the lung, and the 9th, 10th and 11th rib on the left side. So the diaphragmatic surface will have certain markings or impressions for the 9th, 10th and 11th ribs on the left side, and it is basically separating the spleen from the costodiaphragmatic recess of the pleura, the lung, and the 9th, 10th and 11th ribs through the diaphragm. Again, in this diagram, we are seeing both of the surfaces. We are seeing the diaphragmatic surface. In this diaphragmatic surface, you can see that we have certain markings which are present for the ribs. We have the posterior end over here, we have the anterior end over here, we have the inferior border over here, and we have the superior border over here, which is going to present certain notching over here. In this diagram, you can see the visceral surface. You can see that between the intermediate and the superior borders, we will have the gastric surface. Between the inferior and the intermediate borders, we are going to have the renal surface, and over here on the near the anterior end, we are going to have the colic surface. And then you also have the hilum, which is transmitting all these vessels and other structures. So these are just some coronal relations, coronal views to show the relations of the spleen. So we can see that if this is a coronal view and we are seeing it in this dimension, that we have the superior structures over here and the inferior over here. So as you can see that as the spleen, the direction of the spleen is downwards, forwards and laterally along the axis of the 10th rib. And as you can see that the diaphragm is separating it from the pleura, the costodiaphragmatic recess and the ribs on the left side. Again, in this diagram, we can see the posterior view, and we can actually see the impressions, the gastric impression, the renal impression and the colic impression, and we can see how these are related to the position of the spleen along the axis of the 10th rib. This is the axis of the 10th rib, and we can see that the direction of the spleen is also in this direction, along this axis, downwards, forwards and laterally. The arterial supply to the spleen comes from the splenic artery. This splenic artery we have studied in the large blood vessels of the gut. This splenic artery is the largest branch of the celiac trunk. So the celiac trunk is the branch of abdominal aorta, and from the celiac trunk the largest branch is the splenic artery. The splenic artery has a tortuous course. It's not straight. It basically follows a tortuous course. Why it follows a tortuous course? Because the spleen can move with respiration. When we take a deep breath, when we inspire, the spleen actually moves downwards. So because of the movements of the spleen with respiration, if we have a straight artery, it would cause a pull on that vascular structure. So this is why the splenic artery has a tortuous course to allow for the movement of the spleen with respiration. The splenic artery, it basically passes through the linorenal ligament or the splenic ligament or the splenorenal ligament to reach the hilum alongside the tail of the pancreas. And once it reaches the hilum, it is going to divide into around 5 or greater than 5, or some books say 6. Mainly you can say that we have 5 or more than 5 branches. And these branches, they are going to enter into the spleen. Once these branches enter into the spleen, they are going to divide into further branches, and they will form ultimately straight vessels known as penicillar arteries. And these penicillar arteries or arterioles will then divide into capillaries, which are then going to supply the pulp of the spleen. So the pathway, the main way in which these different capillaries, they supply the spleen, this can occur. There are different theories regarding this. We don't have exactly an exact understanding of how this happens. We have a couple of theories. So one theory is that we have an open pathway. So the open pathway means that the capillaries, once they reach the red pulp of the spleen, I'm sure you must have read about the red and the white pulp of the spleen in your lymphoid organs when you were studying the histology in your first year MBBS. So once these capillaries, or once these arterial capillaries or ellipsoidal capillaries reach the red pulp, they can follow an open circulation pathway where they will just open into the sinusoids through the walls. The blood will just enter into the red pulp and then will enter into the sinusoids through the walls of the sinusoids. We can also have a closed pathway where the capillaries are actually continuous with the sinusoids themselves, and these sinusoids will get the blood from the capillaries and then they will join to form veins. Or we may have a compromised pathway. So the compromised pathway means that when the spleen is distended, when the spleen is relatively open, we will have an open circulation, but when the spleen gets contracted due to movement of the surrounding structures, circulation will shift to a closed circulation system, and this will basically be allowing us the separation and storage of the RBCs. So we have a couple of theories regarding how the blood supply occurs inside the spleen, but the main thing that we need to remember is that the blood supply is through the splenic artery, which passes through the lienorenal ligament and divides into greater than 5 branches. The splenic artery, as we have studied previously, it also gives off various branches to the pancreas. We all know that it gives 5 to 7 short gastric branches which are traversing the gastrosplenic ligament, and it also gives off a left gastroepiploic artery, which is anastomosing with the right gastroepiploic artery around the greater curvature of the stomach. So over here we have the splenic artery. As you can see, once it reaches the hilum, it is going to divide into various branches. It is going to divide into 4 or 5 branches. And the way in which this is dividing, you can see that it is dividing the spleen into 2 segments. It is dividing the spleen into a superior vascular segment. This is the superior segment over here. And it is also dividing it into an inferior vascular segments. And these vascular segments themselves, they are going to be separated by a plane which is going to be avascular. All of these segments are further going to divide into 1 to 2 disc-like segments and a cap-like pole segment. And the importance of these segments inside the spleen is that when we need to remove the spleen, sometimes we don't need to remove the entire spleen. We can just remove the segment which has something wrong with it, and we can preserve the rest of the spleen in this fashion. The venous drainage of the spleen is through the splenic vein, which is formed at the hilum of the spleen. Obviously, it is going to be formed by the veins which are following, getting the blood from the venous sinusoids. And this splenic vein is going to run straight behind the pancreas. As we can see over here, this is the splenic vein. It is going to run straight behind the pancreas. It is going to get certain tributaries from the inferior mesenteric vein, from the left gastroepiploic vein, from the short gastric veins, and from well as from certain small pancreatic veins. And then it is going to combine with the superior mesenteric vein, and ultimately it will form the portal vein, which we will study in this lecture as well. The proper spleen tissue, the spleen, as we said, it is itself a lymphoid organ, but the splenic tissue itself, the red pulp, it doesn't have any lymphatics. But the capsule of the spleen and the trabeculae of the spleen, they have connective tissue, and the lymphatics from these connective tissue, they drain into the pancreatic or splenic lymph nodes, which are present alongside the splenic artery in the lienorenal ligament, and ultimately all of these lymph nodes drain into the celiac lymph nodes. The nerve supply of the spleen comes from sympathetic fibers which are derived from the celiac plexus. Most of these fibers are vasomotor, so they are going to supply the smooth muscles of the vessels, and they also supply some smooth muscle which is present inside the capsule of the spleen as well. Sometimes you might have accessory spleens. So these accessory spleens, they are mainly present inside the hilum of the spleen, but they can also be present in one of the ligaments such as the gastrosplenic, the lienorenal, or the gastrophrenic ligament. They can even be present in the greater omentum, and sometimes they can also be present inside the pelvis, in the broad ligament of the uterus in females, and in the spermatic cord in males. The importance of these accessory spleens is that sometimes, let's say that we have a pathology, a leukemia or a blood cancer which is involving the spleen and causing it to enlarge. So you remove the spleen, in this case you do a splenectomy, but what happens is that after you have removed the main spleen, these accessory spleens, they may increase in size, and they can cause the same symptoms for which you remove the main spleen. So it is important to know that the accessory spleens can be present. The major site of these accessory spleens is the hilum, but they can also be present in the tail of the pancreas, in the gastrosplenic or lienorenal ligaments, in the greater omentum and in the pelvis, as we have said above. Some clinical correlates of the spleen include enlargement of the spleen, which is known as splenomegaly. The enlarged spleen, now this is going to go in a different course. We said that the long axis of the spleen was along the long axis of the 10th rib. The direction of the spleen is downwards, forwards, and laterally. But when the spleen is going to enlarge, when this spleen is going to enlarge, it is going to enlarge in a downward and medial direction. So this is how the spleen is going to enlarge. The direction of the enlargement will be downwards and medially. And once it enlarges, it will project below the left costal margin. And once this projects below the left costal margin and gets around 2 times its normal size, we can even palpate the spleen through the anterior abdominal wall, especially during inspiration. Turning the patient to the right side can actually help us, because it will cause us to feel the spleen more properly because of its descent downwards and medially. The left colic flexure and the phrenicocholic ligament. We have said that the phrenicocholic ligament was supporting the anterior end of the spleen. So this is the reason why the spleen doesn't just enlarge downwards, because it is preventing the spleen from enlarging directly downwards. So that is why some of the enlargement is directed medially as well. And if the spleen is very, very enlarged, it can even project towards the right iliac fossa in the direction of axis of the 10th rib. In this diagram, you can see that this is a healthy spleen, and this is how the spleen gets enlarged. This is diagram. You don't need to know the spreading system. I'm just added this to show you the direction of the splenic enlargement. That the spleen can enlarge in a downwards and medial fashion. It can project below the left costal margin and get palpable. And sometimes it can enlarge even up to as far as the right iliac fossa, and its expansion can go as far as the symphysis pubis. Splenic trauma can either be blunt or penetrating. So spleen, whatever the cause is, we can lacerate the spleen. We can basically cause a split in the spleen. This can be due to an automobile accident, and it can also be due to penetrating wounds which are occurring in the left lower thorax. Trauma can cause a lot of internal hemorrhaging. Why? Because the spleen is a very, very vascular structure. So if the spleen gets ruptured, especially near the hilum, a lot of blood will flow into the peritoneal cavity, and there will be extensive internal hemorrhaging with systemic side effects. We can also have a splenic infarction. Why? Because the branches, the splenic artery, we have said it divides into 5 branches. So these branches, all of these branches are end arteries, and the reason, and because of these being end arteries, we can actually, if one of these artery gets blocked, so let's say this artery, I am blocking this artery, the segment of the spleen which is going to be supplied by this artery is not going to get any further blood. So this segment will die off, and this will be known as splenic infarction. So this splenic infarction will cause referred pain in the left shoulder. The pain which can occur due to splenic infarction can also be present inside the epigastrium, and if there is trauma to the spleen, or there is any other cause which causes stretching of the splenic capsule, it can also cause localized pain in the posterior part of the left hypochondrium or left costal region. Splenectomy is known as the surgical removal of the spleen. We can either remove the spleen entirely, or we can remove a partial segment of the spleen. We can do this either open or in a laparoscopic fashion. The point is that we have the tail of the pancreas which is present in the lienorenal ligament, and we need to be very, very careful when we are dividing this ligament, when we are cutting through this ligament to remove the spleen. Why? Because if we cut the tail of the pancreas, it is rich in islets of Langerhans. So if we cut this tail of pancreas, we can lead to other systemic problems for the patient. So we need to preserve the tail of the pancreas when we are removing the spleen, and we need to be very careful when we are cutting through these pedicles, the gastrosplenic and the lienorenal ligaments. We need to separate their contents before we cut these ligaments during a removal of the spleen. Now we come to the portal vein. Is basically a large venous structure which is draining blood from the abdominal part of the GI tract, especially from the lower third of the esophagus to halfway down the anal canal. And so we basically, when we were studying the blood supply of the gastrointestinal tract, the venous drainage of this entire gastrointestinal tract that we studied, starting from the lower third of the esophagus to midway down the anal canal, all of the venous drainage that ultimately drains into the portal vein. It also drains from the accessory structures which are present in the abdomen, such as the spleen, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. The portal vein finally enters the liver and it breaks up into different branches. It divides into two major branches, which then break up into sinusoids in the liver. And the blood from these sinusoids, it then goes to the hepatic veins. These hepatic veins then join the systemic circulation, which in the form of the inferior vena cava. So the portal vein basically represents a transit. It basically represents a system through which all of the blood from the GI tract, it communicates through the liver with the systemic circulation. It is around 5 to 8 centimeters long, and the portal vein is formed behind the neck of the pancreas, as we have studied a lot of times before, by the union of the superior mesenteric veins and the splenic veins at the level of L2 vertebra. So over here you can see that this is the spleen, this is the body of the pancreas, then we have the head of the pancreas over here and the neck over here. Behind the neck, the splenic vein will combine with the superior mesenteric. The course of the portal vein is that this portal vein, after its formation, this is the superior mesenteric and this is the splenic vein, it is going to go upwards and to the right side. So it is going to ascend to the right side, and as we can see with the first part in which this is ascending, let me just get my pen. The first part which is this is ascending, this small part, over here it is behind the neck of the pancreas, but below the first part of the duodenum, so this is also known as the infraduodenal part of the portal vein. And then it comes behind the first part of the duodenum, which is the retroduodenal part, and finally it crosses the duodenum and enters into the free margin of the lesser omentum, which is present over here. Once it enters this free margin, this is the supraduodenal part of the portal vein. And once it enters into the margin of the lesser sac or the lesser omentum, then it runs upwards to the right end of the porta hepatis, and once it reaches the porta hepatis, it is going to divide into two branches. We will have a shorter, wider right branch on the right side, and we will have a long and narrow left branch on the left side. The blood flow through the portal vein is streamlined. Basically, the portal vein is carrying all of the blood from the gastrointestinal tract and providing it to the liver. So the total blood supply of the liver, around 70% of it is coming from this pathway through the portal vein. But the remaining blood to the liver, it is going to come from the hepatic artery, and this is going to be the oxygenated blood. This is around 30%. The point is that when the splenic vein, it combines with the superior mesenteric vein. So this is the splenic vein, this is the superior mesenteric vein, and once it forms the portal vein, the direction of the blood flow will basically be streamlined. We have a very wide angle of union over here. As you can see, the angle of union between the splenic and the superior mesenteric vein is very wide. So the blood flow which was coming from the superior mesenteric vein from the intestine, this is just going to go in this direction, and finally when the portal vein divides into right and left branches, it is going to mainly go to the right lobe of the liver. Whereas the blood which was coming from the splenic vein, this blood is going to through the portal vein, through the left branch of the portal vein, to the caudate and quadrate lobes of the liver, as well as the left lobe of the liver. And this distribution of blood can also explain the distribution of secondary malignant deposits in the liver. That means we have an intestinal tumor, its deposition will be mainly in the right lobe of the liver, but when we have a tumor coming from the spleen or the stomach, its deposition will be mainly in the left lobe or the caudate or quadrate lobes of the liver. Again, we have the similar diagram showing how the portal vein is formed and its parts. And over here you can see the course of the portal vein as well as its distribution into the liver. So the relations of the portal vein, the part which is below the duodenum, it has the neck of the pancreas present anteriorly. Why? Because we said this is the part, the infraduodenal part lying behind the neck of the pancreas. So the neck of the pancreas will be the anterior relation, whereas the inferior vena cava will be the posterior relation. In the retroduodenal part, the first part of the duodenum, the bile duct as well as the gastroduodenal artery, these will be the anterior relations of the portal vein, whereas the IVC will again be the posterior relation. Whereas in the supraduodenal part, it has entered into the free margin of the lesser omentum. So the hepatic artery and the bile duct are going to be the anterior relations of the portal vein over here, whereas the IVC will be the posterior relation of the portal vein, and it will be separated from it by the epiploic foramen of Winslow that you have studied previously. The portal vein, it divides, as we said, into right and left branches. The right branch is short and wide. This is the right branch, and just below the right branch enters into the right lobe of the liver. It receives the cystic vein as well from the gallbladder. Whereas the left branch, it is longer and it is narrower, and it is also going to receive a lot of different branches. So it is going to receive ligamentum venosum, and also going to receive paraumbilical veins, short paraumbilical veins, which are present along the ligamentum teres. And once it receives these veins, then it will enter into the left lobe of the liver and supply over there. We can also see the various tributaries of the portal vein in this diagram as well. So the tributaries, I'm just going to use a different color for the tributaries. The tributaries of the portal vein will be the superior pancreaticoduodenal vein, the cystic vein, which is for the right branch, the ligamentum venosum and the ligamentum paraumbilical veins through the ligamentum teres. The splenic vein is obviously one of the major veins which is forming the portal vein. The left and the right gastric. This is the same diagram. We can see that the tributaries include the left gastric, the right gastric, the superior pancreaticoduodenal, the cystic vein in the right branch, and the paraumbilical vein in the left branch, as we studied in the previous slide. So we have the right branch of this is the portal vein dividing into the right and the left branches. The right branch is receiving the cystic vein, the left branch is receiving the paraumbilical vein and the ligamentum venosum. And apart from that, we have the superior pancreaticoduodenal veins, the right and the left gastric veins, which are entering the portal vein. The portal system, as we have said, that through the liver sinusoids, the portal system is in communication with the systemic venous circulation. These sinusoids, they ultimately drain into the hepatic veins, which are communicating with the inferior vena cava. So the portal vein, the blood from the portal vein is going to traverse the liver and then enter into the IVC. After getting filtered, the point is that the blood over here, it is going to get filtered. The blood coming from the intestine, it is going to get filtered by the liver, and then it is going to enter into the systemic circulation to return to the heart. So there are, but this is the major route through which the portal system communicates with the inferior vena cava. We also have other small communications, and these communications are known as sites for portosystemic or portocaval anastomosis. These become very important when the main route is blocked. When this main pathway through the liver is blocked because of any thrombosis of the portal vein or because of cirrhosis of the liver, then these small communications, the portosystemic anastomoses, they become important for providing a communication between the portal and systemic circulations. These communications are, the major communications are present at the lower third of the esophagus, where the esophageal branches of the left gastric vein, so the left gastric vein is a portal tributary, so the esophageal branches of it are also coming from the portal vein. They are anastomosed with the major esophageal veins which were draining the middle third of the esophagus, and these branches which were draining the middle third of the esophagus were coming from the azygos, were ultimately going into the azygos vein. So we have a systemic tributary and a portal tributary communicating over here. So we have one site of anastomosis at the lower third of the esophagus. We have another one halfway down the anal canal, whereas the superior rectal vein communicates with the inferior and middle rectal veins, which are systemic tributaries. Then we have paraumbilical veins. These paraumbilical veins connect the left branch of the portal vein through the ligamentum teres with the superficial veins present on the anterior abdominal wall. And finally, the veins of the ascending descending colon, duodenum, pancreas and liver, they are anastomosed. This is a summary of the sites. We have some sites at the lower esophagus, at the rectum and anal canal, at the umbilicus, at the bare area of the liver, retroperitoneally, and through the patent ductus venosus as well. So at the lower end of esophagus, it's the left gastric vein with the esophageal veins draining into the azygos vein. At the rectum, we have the superior rectal vein with the middle and inferior rectal veins. At the level of the umbilicus, we have the paraumbilical veins with the superior and inferior epigastric veins supplying the anterior abdominal wall. In the bare area of the liver, we have the portal venous branches which are communicating with the inferior phrenic and right internal thoracic vein. Retroperitoneally, we have tributaries of splenic, pancreatic and colic veins which are communicating with the renal, adrenal, paravertebral and gonadal veins. So this is a depiction of all of these sides of portosystemic anastomosis. We have the esophageal branches of the left gastric vein over here and the esophageal tributaries of the accessory hemiazygous and azygous vein over here. We have one side over here. We have the second side at the rectum where the superior rectal vein is communicating with the middle and inferior rectal veins. Then we have multiple other small sides. For instance, over here where the paraumbilical veins are communicating with the superficial veins through of the anterior abdominal wall, which are the inferior and superior epigastric. Then we have some anastomosis over here in the bare area of the liver, and we also have anastomosis retroperitoneally where the twigs of the renal vein, as we can see, they are communicating with the colic veins, the left colic vein, and the twigs of the splenic vein are also communicating with the twigs of the renal vein over here. So the blood flow through the portal system, it has a blood pressure, and this normal portal pressure is around 5 to 15 millimeters of mercury. But when this pressure rises up due to any blockage in the portal circulation, it can go beyond 40 millimeters of mercury, and this is known as portal hypertension. The causes for this are cirrhosis or portal vein thrombosis. We already said that when the portal vein gets blocked, the blood is going to back up and it will cause portal hypertension. And what happens is that the accessory sites, the sites of portocable anastomosis, these sites are going to get swollen up. So we will have congestive enlargement of the spleen known as congestive splenomegaly. We will have ascites, and we will also have formation of the varices. Varices are basically dilated veins which are present at the sites of portocable anastomosis. The portocable shunts represent a form of treatment for portal hypertension. In this, we basically create a shunt between one of the either the portal vein or one of its major tributaries, such as the splenic or the superior mesenteric vein, with the anterior wall of the inferior vena cava. So we create a shunt and we bypass the obstruction or blockage which was causing portal hypertension in the first place. We can also anastomose the splenic vein directly to the left renal vein after removal of the spleen in these cases. So whenever collateral circulation occurs through the portosystemic shunt system, let's see over here what happens. We have the portal circulation which was blocked. What happens is that the sites of the esophageal in the esophageal area, where we have the esophageal communication of the portal and the systemic veins, blood flow will increase from the portal to the caval sites. Normally the direction of blood flow is either unilateral or is unilateral from the caval to the portal circulation. But when the pressure inside the portal system is on a higher side, the blood flow will go in the opposite direction, and it will cause the veins near the esophagus, lower end of the esophagus, to blow up, and these dilated tortuous veins will represent the esophageal varices. Similar thing can happen inside near the rectum, and when this happens near the rectum, we call these rectal varices or internal hemorrhoids or internal piles. And if this happens in the region of the anterior abdominal wall, we can have caput medusae over here. These are the effects of portal hypertension. We can have esophageal varices, and these esophageal varices can sometimes bleed and cause bleeding through vomiting. We can also have splenomegaly, which is congestive enlargement of the spleen. We can have caput medusae, which is the presence of these veins, like medusae here on the anterior abdominal wall. We can also have ascites. We can have portal hypertensive gastropathy, and we can have anorectal varices or internal hemorrhoids as well. This is all from our lecture on the spleen and the portal vein. Thank you very much.